The aircraft's engines thundered into motion, and a chorus of voices swelled throughout the cabin as travelers settled into their seats, secured their seatbelts, and tucked away their luggage. Amidst the tailored suits, glittering jewels, and gleaming footwear of the first-class section sat a presence who appeared to come from an entirely different realm. She was Evelyn Maynard, a 72-year-old farmer bearing sun-worn skin, work-hardened hands, and eyes that held the burden of countless mornings devoted to cultivating the earth. She was dressed in a straw hat, a checkered shirt, and a pair of shoes so worn they appeared to have traversed entire continents. As she settled quietly into her luxurious first-class seat, murmurs started to cascade through the cabin. Onlookers studied her clothing, then glanced at their mobile devices, then exchanged knowing looks with one another through tight-lipped smiles that swiftly evolved into hushed gossip. Before we proceed, if you hold faith and compassion, in the merit of fresh starts, and in refusing to assess someone based on their outward appearance, please give this video a thumbs up, share your perspectives in the comments, pass it along to your friends, and subscribe to our channel, Untold Stories 0.4. Narratives such as these serve as reminders of how easily we lose sight of the fact that dignity and value are never displayed on the surface. The hushed gossip transformed into contemptuous remarks. A pearl-adorned woman lifted her chin haughtily and elbowed her spouse, who let out a chuckle. A youthful executive wearing a navy necktie withdrew his phone and captured a discreet photograph, suppressing his laughter. The flight attendant, a fair-haired woman with flawless cosmetics and a teal-colored uniform, moved toward Evelyn wearing a smile pulled taut like a drawn string. Her tone, though intended to sound courteous, oozed with contempt as she inquired whether the older woman might be confused, suggesting that certainly her ticket must be for the economy section. Evelyn peacefully retrieved the printed ticket from her modest leather handbag, her hands quivering ever so slightly as she extended it forward. The attendant's gaze flickered across the document, then returned to Evelyn. She paused momentarily, then drew nearer and murmured in a cutting voice that Evelyn needed to collect her belongings and relocate. When Evelyn questioned the reason, the attendant's expression grew stern. "Ma'am," she uttered sharply, "this is first class. This area is reserved for premium passengers. We cannot allow any confusion here." Evelyn's spirit dropped, not from humiliation, but from the all-too-familiar experience of being prejudged. She had devoted her existence to laboring in the fields, cultivating the wheat, corn, and dairy products that nourished families throughout the nation. Yet here, within this refined environment, she was being informed once more that she ranked beneath those encircling her. The confrontation intensified rapidly. Several passengers started encouraging the attendant onward, pressing her to remove the perceived error. A gentleman in a pale gray suit tossed his head backward in amusement, ridiculing the image of a farmer's head resting against the leather headrest. Evelyn remained motionless, clutching her handbag, the pulse of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The degradation seared within her chest, yet she maintained her composure. She had weathered tempests, ruined harvests, and the passing of her husband from sickness. No outsider's mockery could genuinely shatter her resolve, though the tears still loomed. She blinked forcefully, commanding them to retreat, when abruptly the pilot himself emerged. He stood tall, bearing gray-streaked hair at his temples, his uniform pressed and authoritative. However, rather than addressing the situation with grace, he merely appeared irritated. "We don't have time for this," he grumbled, massaging his temples as if Evelyn's mere existence constituted a nuisance. The whispers had escalated into outright mockery now, and Evelyn could sense countless eyes bearing down upon her like burdens. She rose deliberately, positioning one hand upon the armrest for stability. Her voice, when it emerged, was firm yet gentle, slicing through the commotion with understated strength. She regarded the attendant, the jeering passengers, and ultimately the pilot. "You don't need to compel me," she stated. "I've existed long enough to recognize when people don't desire my presence." With these words, she gathered her small handbag and stepped into the passageway, her checkered shirt rustling as she passed the columns of sneering faces. Yet what transpired next hushed the entire aircraft. As Evelyn approached the forward section of the cabin, she extracted her phone. She tapped swiftly, her fingers remarkably composed for a woman of her years. A handful of passengers observed, still entertained, until a sudden buzz in the pilot's pocket prompted him to retrieve his own device. His complexion turned ashen as he absorbed the message. One after another, sounds of astonishment traveled through the first-class cabin as numerous others received alerts as well. A solitary name materialized on the display: Evelyn Maynard, founder of Maynard Agriculture and proprietor of Maynard Aviation Fleet. The older woman in checkered clothing, the one they had derided, was not merely a farmer. She was the leader of one of the nation's largest privately held agricultural operations, a woman whose tireless efforts had constructed an empire that sustained millions, and indeed, who possessed not just a single private aircraft, but an entire modest fleet. The gentleman in the gray suit ceased his laughter. The pearl-wearing woman averted her gaze. The attendant's face flushed crimson as understanding registered, and the pilot, suddenly recalling his instruction in dignity and respect, stiffened rigidly, struggling to offer an apology. Evelyn, nevertheless, merely lifted her hand to silence them. She harbored no fury in her voice, only a profound, unwavering tranquility. "All my life," she declared, "I've been evaluated by my hands, my clothing, my appearance. But what you all fail to remember is that it is these hands that cultivate the earth, these clothes that bear the residue of the land, and this face that has witnessed the world transform. You believed you could humiliate me, but you cannot humiliate someone who understands their value." She returned to her seat, set down her handbag, and lowered herself into the leather chair once more. This time, no one ventured to whisper. Quietness permeated the cabin, dense with mortification and remorse. The executive who had ridiculed her leaned backward. The attendant remained rigidly positioned beside the galley, and the pilot could scarcely make eye contact with her. Evelyn angled her straw hat downward and shut her eyes as if nothing whatsoever had occurred. And yet, the narrative did not conclude there. When the aircraft touched down, Evelyn was accompanied not by scornful attendants, but by a chauffeured vehicle awaiting her on the tarmac. Stationed alongside it was her pristine private jet, buffed to perfection, its engines purring softly in the afternoon sunlight. As she emerged, passengers stretched their necks from the terminal windows, observing in shocked amazement. The woman they had scorned had traveled to the city in first class solely because her own pilots had been performing training exercises that morning. She had selected the commercial flight not from obligation, but from modesty. The teaching resonated more powerfully than any reproachful words. Appearances mislead. The most common-looking individual may harbor remarkable narratives, and those who hasten to criticize may someday find themselves rendered speechless by the very realities they dismissed. If this narrative moved your spirit, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who requires the reminder, subscribe to Untold Stories 0.4, and leave a comment below. It assists us in distributing more narratives that remind the world of compassion, dignity, and the strength of humility.